For 3 decades, Johnny Carson welcomed America's most beloved stars onto his Tonight Show couch, smiling, laughing, and pretending. But behind that charming grin, Carson held secrets that could have shattered careers and rewritten Hollywood history. He knew which heartthrobs were living a lie. He knew which on-screen couples were carefully staged cover-ups. And he knew who was hiding their truth behind studio contracts, fake marriages, and fear. These weren't just whispers. They were explosive truths Carson kept buried for years, until the end. In his final days, the king of late night began to speak, not to millions, but to those closest to him, revealing which legends were living double lives. What follows isn't gossip. It's the story of 9 Hollywood icons, each with a secret Carson never dared say on air, but couldn't take to the grave. This is the truth, ranked from those who bent the rules to those who lived behind the most elaborate lies of all. Number 9. Marlene Dietrich. The woman who outsmarted Hollywood long before Hollywood even dared to whisper the word androgyny. Marlene Dietrich was living it. She didn't just bend the rules, she made them disappear. When Johnny Carson first met her, he was fascinated. Here was a woman who never apologized for who she was, even when the entire industry depended on illusion. Dietrich wasn't just a movie star, she was a walking contradiction, equal parts mystery and rebellion. From her breakthrough in The Blue Angel to her rise as one of cinema's first international icons, Dietrich's confidence and unapologetic sensuality mesmerized audiences. She wore men's suits, spoke with smoky defiance, and moved through Hollywood like a woman immune to judgment. Yet what most people never realized was that her elegance was her armor, a disguise so dazzling that the truth beneath it slipped right past the world's gaze. Carson admired her for that. He knew she wasn't hiding her truth out of shame, she was stylizing it. Her marriage to Rudolph Sieber lasted more than 50 years, yet they lived apart for most of it. Behind the polite smiles, they had what would now be called an open marriage. Sieber stayed in Europe with another partner, while Dietrich's lovers included both men and women, from famous authors to powerful actresses. Hollywood insiders knew, but the public never dared to ask. Her allure lay in her mystery, a European sophistication that made her off-limits to the same rules that suffocated American stars. When American actresses risked ruin for the faintest rumor, Dietrich turned her fluidity into legend. She walked red carpets with women, flirted openly with both genders, and yet somehow, nobody could touch her. Carson often remarked privately that Dietrich was the rare example of someone who beat the system. She didn't hide behind fake marriages or studio contracts. She simply refused to play by their rules, and the studios let her, because her image sold. Her tailored tuxedos, deep voice, and piercing eyes became symbols of forbidden glamour. The more she blurred the lines, the more Hollywood tried to decode her, and the more famous she became. In an era when secrets destroyed lives, Marlene Dietrich turned hers into an art form. As Carson once said off-camera, Marlene didn't hide her truth, she performed it. But if Dietrich danced with danger and won, the next pair on Carson's list lived a lie so intricate, even Hollywood believed it was real. Number 8. Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester. In Hollywood, some secrets were whispered, others were scripted, and then there was Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester, a couple whose entire marriage was a perfectly rehearsed performance. To the outside world, they were the definition of longevity. Married from 1929 until Laughton's death in 1962, they appeared to be a rare success story in a town filled with broken unions. But behind the red carpets and studio portraits lay a quiet arrangement, one that Johnny Carson never forgot. According to insiders who spoke with Carson in his later years, both Laughton and Lanchester were living their own truths, just not the ones Hollywood wanted. He was gay. She was believed to be a lesbian. And their marriage? It was never about romance. It was about survival. Carson found their story uniquely tragic and oddly touching. He interviewed Elsa Lanchester several times after Charles had passed, and while she spoke of their life with fondness and wit, Johnny noticed what she didn't say. The pauses, the careful choice of words. It was like she was still playing a role, even in grief. Unlike the chaotic studio-arranged relationships of their peers, Laughton and Lanchester built something that worked, a mutual cover. a protective bond. They were partners in art, in strategy, and in shielding each other from a world that wouldn't have accepted who they really were. To Carson, their marriage was one of the most functional lies in Hollywood. No scandals, no dramatic breakups, just two brilliant actors sharing a life, protecting one another while letting the world believe what it wanted. Elsa even touched on their relationship briefly in her 1983 autobiography, describing Laughton as not an easy husband, but never addressing the rumors that had followed them for decades. Not denial, not confession, just silence. Carefully preserved silence. Carson often remarked how convincing their public image had been, how effortlessly audiences bought into the illusion. Laughton played patriarchs, judges, kings. Lanchester portrayed quirky wives and loyal mothers. Nobody questioned it, nobody wanted to. And maybe that was the point. In an industry built on fiction, Laughton and Lanchester delivered their greatest performance off-screen. As Carson once said in private, they didn't fool each other, they fooled the world. But while their secret was whispered behind closed doors, the next name on Carson's list lived in the spotlight. Number 7. Katharine Hepburn, the greatest love story that never was. To the public, it was the most timeless romance in Hollywood history. Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, two giants of the silver screen, locked in a 26-year love affair filled with longing, loyalty, and whispered devotion. But behind the carefully constructed myth, Johnny Carson knew the truth. Their so-called romance wasn't a fairy tale. It was a shield designed to protect two of Hollywood's most guarded stars from a world that demanded conformity and punished authenticity. Carson interviewed Hepburn multiple times. He admired her strength, her intelligence, and her razor-sharp wit. But what intrigued him most was how brilliantly she controlled her image. Never married, independent, fierce, and yet always tethered, in the public's eyes, to Tracy, the married Catholic who never left his wife. According to those close to Carson, he believed the Hepburn-Tracy relationship was more of a pact than a passion, a strategic alliance that allowed both to deflect uncomfortable questions. Tracy could explain his separation from his wife without scandal. Hepburn, free from the scrutiny of being single in a judgmental era, could live life on her own terms. And live it she did. Hepburn's most significant emotional connections were, by many accounts, with women. She shared her life with Laura Harding for years, a bond so strong it drew constant speculation. Later, she spent decades with Phyllis Wilborn, a woman some biographers claim she referred to as her wife. But Hollywood never pushed. The Tracy myth was just too powerful, too poetic. Carson found it remarkable how a fabricated love story had become gospel. Movies, biographies, even tributes painted them as soulmates. But behind the curtain, it was a masterclass in misdirection. Tracy's alcoholism, his long absences, and Hepburn's refusal to play the studio social game. What truly struck Carson was Hepburn's fashion, not as a statement, but as quiet defiance. The trousers, the flat shoes, the tailored jackets, she wore what she wanted, not what was expected. In an industry obsessed with ultra-feminine glamour, Hepburn's androgynous style became a subtle form of authenticity. She figured it out, Carson reportedly said. She lived on her own terms, even if the story the world believed wasn't real. While others hid behind photo ops and staged marriages, Hepburn built her privacy into a myth, and the world believed it because it wanted to. But if Hepburn controlled her image with brilliance, the next name on Carson's list was trapped in his by 5 marriages, one unforgettable voice, and a secret that sat beside him on Johnny's couch more than once. Number 6. Cary Grant, the gentleman behind the curtain. Cary Grant wasn't just a movie star, he was the blueprint. Impeccably dressed, endlessly charming, with a transatlantic accent and a twinkle in his eye, he was the man every woman wanted and every man wanted to be. But Johnny Carson knew there was another side to the legend, a quieter, hidden truth that Grant spent his entire career carefully managing, and that Hollywood went to great lengths to protect. On-screen, Grant defined sophistication. Off-screen, he shared a Santa Monica beach house with fellow actor Randolph Scott for over a decade, a home Hollywood insiders wryly dubbed Bachelor Hall. To the press, they were simply two men sharing expenses. But to those in the know, including Carson, the truth was obvious. Grant married 5 times, but according to Carson's private reflections, none of those unions ever came close to the bond he had with Scott. They cooked together, worked out together, took press photos in matching robes by the pool. These weren't just friends, they were a couple hiding in plain sight. Carson found it surreal. He'd interview Grant, asking about his marriages, knowing full well the deepest relationship in Grant's life was sitting quietly off camera. And Grant? He played along. Always the gentleman, always the star, even when his life was a script he didn't write. The arrangement worked because it had to. In mid-20th century America, the idea that cinema's suavest leading man might be gay wasn't just controversial, it was career-ending, so the studios leaned in. The publicity machines flooded magazines with stories of his dashing romances and glamorous wives, reinforcing the illusion the world so desperately wanted to believe. Carson wasn't judgmental, but he was troubled. He once said the saddest thing about Grant's life wasn't who he loved, it was that he had to become someone else just to survive. He created Cary Grant, Carson reflected, and then he had to be him forever. Behind the tuxedos and one-liners was Archibald Leach, a working-class kid from England who built the perfect persona to hide the parts of himself the world wasn't ready to accept. And in the end, even he admitted it. Late in life, Grant said, "Everyone wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant." Carson never forgot that line, because he understood what it really meant. But if Cary Grant was able to build a public image that disguised his truth, the next man on Carson's list had no such luxury. His life was a split screen, heartthrob by day, secret seeker by night, and the cost of his beauty was silence. Number 5. Tyrone Power, the matinee idol's hidden nights. Tyrone Power had the kind of face that made studios rich and audiences swoon. Chiseled features, smoldering eyes, and a voice that melted across movie screens. He was 20th Century Fox's prized possession. To the world, he was the ultimate swashbuckling hero. But to Johnny Carson, Tyrone Power was a man divided between the image Hollywood sold and the private truth he could never risk revealing. Power died in 1958, years before Carson took over The Tonight Show. But the stories about him never stopped. Older guests, longtime producers, and insiders whispered the same tale again and again, that Power had lived a carefully constructed double life. By day, he was the fantasy. Studio-arranged dates, red carpet appearances with glamorous actresses, and a string of high-profile marriages to women like Annabella and Linda Christian kept the headlines neat. But by night, according to those in the know, Power sought companionship that could have destroyed his career in a single headline. Carson heard it all, and what fascinated him wasn't the secret itself, but how flawlessly it was hidden. There were no scandals, no slip-ups, just a perfect split. Romantic idol by daylight, guarded soul by darkness. What struck Carson most was how trapped Power must have felt. His physical beauty, the very thing that made him famous, was also the thing that imprisoned him. Fans felt possessive, studios were obsessive. His face was more than a blessing, it was a brand, and brands don't get to be honest. Carson reflected often on how Power's marriages weren't necessarily lies, but lifeboats. Emotional partnerships that offered cover, structure, and some version of stability. These relationships, while real in their own right, were also tools in a survival kit, because authenticity for Power came with risk. In private conversations, Carson reportedly called Power the loneliest star. Not because he lacked love, but because he could never show it, never speak it, never live it in the open. Power's death at just 44 from a heart attack robbed him of the chance to see a changing world. Carson often wondered what might have happened if he'd lived longer, if the slow march toward tolerance could have met Power's truth. Instead, like so many of his era, he went to his grave with the public still swooning, and the real story buried beneath the image. But if Power's secret life was compartmentalized, the next man on Carson's list carried his deception everywhere, in his stories, in his smile, and in a fictional past that never really existed. Number 4. Raymond Burr, the fictional life of a truth seeker. To millions of Americans, Raymond Burr was the very embodiment of justice. As Perry Mason, he stood for truth, integrity, and fearless cross-examinations. Later, as Ironside, he broke boundaries playing a detective in a wheelchair. Smart, unshakable, commanding. But behind that powerful screen presence, Johnny Carson knew something that audiences didn't. Burr's real life was a fiction far more elaborate than any courtroom drama. Burr appeared on The Tonight Show several times, charming, thoughtful, gracious, but Carson could feel it, the performance underneath the performance. Burr wasn't just hiding who he loved, he was hiding everything. According to Carson's private conversations, Burr didn't merely mask his sexuality, he invented an entire alternate life. He told stories of a tragic marriage, a son who died in a plane crash, and war wounds from a military service that never happened. None of it was true, not one detail. Interviewing him, Carson once said, "Felt like talking to a character, not a man." He wasn't exaggerating. Burr crafted an identity so airtight that even seasoned journalists repeated the stories as fact. But the truth? He had never been married. He had no son, and he never served in the war. What Carson found most heartbreaking was how complete the lie was. Burr couldn't just fake a relationship or dodge rumors. He had to manufacture grief, a dead wife, a lost child, tragedy as camouflage, all while living quietly and lovingly with his partner, Robert Benavides. For 35 years, they built a life together in total secrecy. They ran a vineyard, grew orchids, traveled, loved, and called it business. Carson knew the cost. He understood the pressure of playing along. Here was a man who portrayed justice for a living, but had to lie just to be himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. Burr fought for truth on television, Carson said, but in real life he had to lie to survive. After Burr's death in 1993, Benavides inherited his estate. Slowly, the truth began to surface. The war record? Fabricated. The marriages? Non-existent. The child? Imagined. What remained was something raw and tragic. A man forced to hide his greatest love behind the saddest lie. And yet, if Burr's fiction was crafted with sorrow, the next man on Carson's list blurred truth and persona in a way that fascinated and haunted Johnny for years to come. Number 3. Marlon Brando. The method actor's hidden method. Marlon Brando wasn't just a movie star, he was a revolution, the rawest, realest actor of his generation. When he bellowed Stella in A Streetcar Named Desire, the world believed every word. When he mumbled through The Godfather, he changed acting forever. But Johnny Carson knew the greatest performance Brando ever gave was off-screen. Carson had Brando on The Tonight Show multiple times, and each appearance was a challenge. Brando could be charming or cagey, engaging or aloof, but always guarded. Behind those smoldering eyes was a man who spent his life hiding something Hollywood refused to accept, that Marlon Brando's sexuality didn't fit into the box the industry demanded. To the world, Brando was the ultimate alpha. He dated starlets, married women, fathered children, and the press ate it up. But in private, Carson had heard the same whispers from countless insiders. Brando's desires were far more fluid than the world was allowed to see. Brando himself hinted at it late in life, admitting in interviews that he'd had homosexual experiences and felt no shame about it. But during his prime, this part of him was buried deep beneath the leather jacket and brute masculinity the studios clung to. What haunted Carson wasn't just Brando's secrecy, it was the contradiction. Here was a man known for tearing down performance walls, bringing brutal honesty to his roles, while carefully managing one of the biggest fictions of his personal life. There were rumors of relationships with James Dean, with male directors, with friends who never appeared in the tabloids. Carson never confirmed names, but he was captivated by the pattern. Because Brando didn't just play rebels, he was one, and yet he still bent to the system when it came to love. Brando was the boldest actor I ever saw, Carson once said, but even he had to hide. Carson saw it as a tragic irony. The man who redefined truth on screen was forced to lie in life. But while Brando wrestled with contradictions, the next name on Carson's list never had the chance to face the fallout. Because by the time the world was ready to ask questions, he was already gone. Number 2. James Dean, the rebel with a price. James Dean lived fast, died young, and became immortal. In just 3 films, East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant, he captured a generation's hunger for something real, raw, emotional, unfiltered. But what Johnny Carson knew, and what the world never got to see, was just how much Dean may have paid to become a legend. Dean died in 1955, long before Carson ever took the helm of The Tonight Show, but the whispers never stopped. Hollywood insiders, older actors, agents, directors shared stories in green rooms and backstage hallways, and Carson listened. He connected the dots, and what he heard haunted him. The rumor wasn't just that James Dean was gay or bisexual, it was that he had used his body, his sexuality, as currency, that before the world called him brilliant, powerful men in Hollywood called him something else. Carson learned about Dean's rumored relationship with director Rogers Brackett, a man who had the power to make or break a career. The whispers suggested that Dean, desperate to escape small-town anonymity, may have entered into relationships not out of love, but out of necessity. And that was the part that troubled Carson the most. To the public, Dean was the ultimate rebel, a symbol of artistic integrity. But to those in the know, he may have been a young man forced to play a dangerous game just to get noticed. A game many had played, a game that could never be spoken of. People think Dean died before Hollywood could ruin him, Carson once confided. But what if it already had? Dean's early death at just 24 froze his image in time. He never had to navigate the cruel balancing act of Brando or Grant. He was never outed, never questioned, never forced to explain. And in that sense, Carson believed his death protected him. The rumors never became headlines. The truth never had to surface. But for Carson, the tragedy ran deeper. Because if the rumors were true, James Dean was both a symbol and a casualty of a system that demanded everything and gave nothing back unless you played by its rules. And yet, as dark as Dean's alleged sacrifices may have been, there was one secret even more devastating. A name so wrapped in myth, so carefully hidden, that even his death didn't expose the truth until it was too late. Number 1. Rock Hudson, the heartthrob who died hiding. He was the fantasy of an entire generation. Rock Hudson, tall, square-jawed, effortlessly charming, the face of 1950s romance. Women adored him, men admired him, studios built empires around him. And yet Johnny Carson knew it was all a lie. Hudson was the leading man. Paired with Doris Day in romantic comedies that defined an era, he represented the perfect American male. Strong, sensitive, devoted. But behind the soft lighting and scripted laughs was a man living in quiet terror. A man whose entire existence was engineered to hide his truth. Carson interviewed Hudson multiple times. Smiles, laughs, movie anecdotes, everything looked picture perfect. But behind the scenes, Carson confided to close friends that every conversation felt like walking on a landmine. One wrong question, one accidental slip, and the facade would shatter, along with Hudson's career. Because everyone in Hollywood knew, Hudson was gay. It was an open secret, shared in whispers, never in print. And Carson, he carried that burden every time Hudson sat across from him, pretending. Hudson's agent, Henry Wilson, had orchestrated a lavender marriage to Secretary Phyllis Gates, a studio-engineered relationship designed solely to squash the rumors. It lasted only 3 years, but it served its purpose. The public bought the act. The studios kept making money, and Rock Hudson kept smiling. Carson later called it institutionalized lying. He wasn't angry at Hudson, he was angry at the system, a machine so powerful, so ruthless, that it forced a man to build an entire life around a secret, and not just any man, America's romantic ideal. The pressure was unbearable. Carson saw it. He felt it, and when Hudson was diagnosed with AIDS in the mid-1980s, at a time when the disease was still demonized, everything came crashing down. Hudson's death in 1985 was a turning point. It forced the world to confront what it had long ignored. The perfect leading man wasn't who he said he was, and that revelation shook Hollywood and Carson to the core. Carson was devastated, not just because he'd lost a guest or even a friend, but because he realized he had helped uphold the lie. Interview after interview, he'd played along, not out of cruelty, but out of fear, out of necessity. He was trapped, Carson said near the end of his life, and we all helped build the trap. Rock Hudson's legacy is complicated. He was a pioneer, even if unwilling, a victim, even while adored, and a reminder of how deeply the truth can be buried, even when it's sitting right in front of the camera. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was America's late-night confidant, delivering laughs, charm, and unforgettable moments. But behind the curtain, he was also the keeper of Hollywood's deepest secrets. Secrets he never exposed on air. Secrets that could have destroyed lives, and in some cases, already had. As he grew older, Carson began to see his role differently. He wasn't just a host. He was part of a system that forced stars to lie, to hide, to become characters in their own lives. And while he never outed anyone, the weight of what he knew stayed with him. From Rock Hudson's terrified silence, to James Dean's whispered sacrifices, from the tragic partnerships of Laughton and Lanchester, to the calculated elegance of Marlene Dietrich, Carson saw it all and carried it quietly until his final days. In the end, he didn't just reveal these stories to shock or gossip. He shared them because they mattered. Because behind the glitz, behind the laughter, were real people struggling to be themselves in a world that wouldn't let them. And now, those stories are finally being told. If this video opened your eyes to the hidden lives behind the Hollywood spotlight, hit that like button. It helps the truth reach more people. Tell us in the comments which of these revelations shocked you the most. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories, hidden legacies, and secrets the studios never wanted you to hear. Because in old Hollywood, the real drama happened when the cameras stopped rolling.